Hi guys, so today is Good Friday, and usually we all meet together as Ignite and do activities and reflect upon Jesus' death. But obviously today we can't do that because we're all separate, so instead we've got this video for you. And Good Friday is a day where all around the world Christians remember how Jesus died and the events that led up to his death. So we're going to hear Bible readings of the events of his death and the story of his last days. And all of the readings are going to come from Matthew, and we're going to start with Becky. So over to you, Beck.
Chapter 26, verses 14 to 16. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priests and asked, "How much will you pay me to betray Jesus to you?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver. From that time on, Judas began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus.
Reading that we had was from Becky, and we heard about how Judas, one of Jesus's really close friends, betrayed him. For only 30 silver coins, Judas was willing to hand over his best friend. Imagine if that was in your life. Imagine a close family member or one of your friends said, actually, do you know what? If someone paid me 100 quid, I would probably tell them all your secrets. I wouldn't stand up for you. I'd just hand you over. Now, the hurt that's involved in that must have been so hard for Jesus to bear, knowing that one of his closest friends was going to betray him, and then he did. The cross demanded it. In order for Jesus to die on the cross, Judas had to betray him. One of his close friends had to turn him in. So the cross demanded friendship from Jesus.
Chapter 26, verses 36 to 39 and verse 47. Then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane, and he said, "Sit here while I go over there to pray." He took Peter and Zebedee's 2 sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, "My soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." He went on a little further and bowed with his face to the ground, praying, "My Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet I want your will to be done, not mine." And verse 47. Even as Jesus said this, Judas, one of the 12 disciples, arrived with a crowd of men armed with swords and clubs. They had been sent by the leading priests and elders of the people.
Talked about how Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane crying out to God the Father, saying, "My soul is troubled. I'm at the point of death. I'm so sad." He says, if you can take this cup, basically, if you can take this load from me, then Father, take it, because I don't know if I can do this. And then he says this, he says, "But not my will, yours, Father." And Jesus there is saying, not what I want, but what you want. I know it's going to hurt. I know it's going to be hard. But actually, I know that it's what you want, so I'm going to do it. And in our lives as Christians, we're called to do the same. We're called to say, "Father, not what I want, but what you want instead." And sometimes that's really difficult. Sometimes we like to control our future. We like to plan out what's going to happen, who we have our friendships with. And sometimes God allows that and it goes really well. And other times it all just feels like it's falling apart and the world gets in the way. And actually recently, probably many of us have felt that. The plans that we had been completely disrupted. The dreams and the hopes we had for this next season up until summer. And now you're wondering whether that's going to happen. All of those things we need to surrender and say, "God, this is happening, but not my will, yours." And Jesus did that in the garden when he cried out to his Father. The cross demanded that Jesus give up control of what happened to him and trust in God.
Peter disowned Jesus. Now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him. "You also with this Jesus of Galilee?" she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "Well, this fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again with an oath. "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you're one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." Immediately a cock crowed. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken. Before the cock crows, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly.
The next demand of the cross is his family. We heard from Chantel a reading of Peter, and Peter denying that he knew Jesus. Now, Peter was one of the 12 disciples, but he was probably one of the closest to Jesus. And actually, the relationship between them was more like brothers, more like family. And for Peter to turn around and say, I don't know who he is. I have nothing to do with that man. I'm not one of his followers. 3 times he denied Jesus. He denied that he loved him. He denied that he knew him. Imagine if that was one of our family. Imagine if someone turned round to us and said, I don't know who you are. I have nothing to do with you. Why would I defend you when you need me? When Peter denied Jesus, he denied his family. When people deny us or we deny them love. But also, I'm sure there's all been times where we've hidden the fact that we believe in God. We've hidden the fact that we're Christians. Maybe we didn't put our hand up in class. Maybe we didn't stick up for what we believe. We deny Jesus in our own lives. And in that, we deny our family. When Jesus was denied by Peter, Jesus had to fulfill the demand of the cross of losing his family.
Chapter 27, verses 19 to 26. Just then, as Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent him this message: "Leave that innocent man alone. I suffered through a terrible nightmare about him last night." Meanwhile, the leading priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas to be released and for Jesus to be put to death. So the governor asked again, "Which of these 2 do you want me to release to you?" The crowd shouted back, "Barabbas." Pilate responded, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" They shouted back, "Crucify him." "Why?" Pilate demanded. "What crime has he committed?" But the mob roared even louder, "Crucify him." Pilate saw that he wasn't getting anywhere and that a riot was developing. So he sent for a bowl of water and washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. The responsibility is yours." And all the people yelled back, "We will take responsibility for his death, we and our children." So Pilate released Barabbas to them. He ordered Jesus flogged with a lead-tipped whip, then turned him over to the Roman soldiers to be crucified.
And the next thing that he loses is his freedom. Sophie read to us the passage where Jesus gets put on trial, where Jesus is found innocent, but the people demand him guilty. Now, I think there are many people out there, Christians and non-Christians, who probably think that if they were around when Jesus was, they know where they would stand. And actually, if they were the one who was called to judge him, they would be able to prove that he wasn't the Son of God. And Pilate got given that job, and Pilate couldn't find any fault. Yet the crowd demanded that he go. The crowd demanded that he be set to death. Jesus was taken in chains. His freedom gone. He was judged unfairly. Now, I'm sure that we've all been judged at some point or another in our lives. We've been judged for what we look like, what we wear, how we sound, what we say. Our attitudes, our opinions, we've been judged on. And maybe we've judged other people. Maybe we were the crowd shouting, "Crucify him." Jesus was judged and his freedom was taken away. The cross demanded his freedom.
This reading is taken from Matthew chapter 27, verses 27 to 31. Some of the governor's soldiers took Jesus into their headquarters and called out the entire regiment. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. They wove thorn branches into a crown and put it on his head, and they placed a reed stick in his right hand as a scepter. Then they knelt before him in mockery and taunted, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they spit on him and grabbed the stick and struck him on the head with it. When they were finally tired of mocking him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him again, and then they led him away to be crucified.
The next thing that is demanded of Jesus is his dignity. We see that the soldiers stripped him of his clothes, made him put on a robe and wear a crown of thorns. They mocked him, spat on him and hit him. They said, "If you are the Son of God, then tell me who just hit you." They humiliated him. They made him feel ashamed. And I'm sure at some points in our lives we've all felt shamed. Whether we've looked at something we shouldn't, we've said something we shouldn't, we've done something that we shouldn't. We've all felt that shame and that heaviness on our heart, like we're so unworthy to be called his child. And Jesus felt that too. He was stripped of his dignity. The cross demanded that of him.
Chapter 27, verse 32 to 37. Along the way, they came across a man named Simon, who was from Cyrene, and the soldiers forced him to carry Jesus' cross. And then they went out to a place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. The soldiers gave him wine mixed with bitter gall, but when he tasted it, he refused to drink it. After he was nailed to the cross, the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice. Then they sat around and kept guard as he hung there. A sign was fastened above Jesus' head, announcing the charge against him. It read, "This is Jesus, King of the Jews."
And the next thing it demands is his physical strength. Charmaine read to us about the way in which he was put upon the cross. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen like crucifixions in a movie or if you've seen any pictures of a crucifixion. It is horrendous. Specifically designed to be the most horrific form of torture you can think of. And the Romans did this to Jesus. They put nails into his hands. Imagine the pain of that, smashed into your feet. They may have broke your legs so that you couldn't bear any weight to press up and get the air into your lungs. He was then suspended upright and put in front of everyone to see. Jesus' physical strength was tested. He couldn't run away. He couldn't hide. He had to bear the torture he was being put through. Now, for many of us, I think we rely on the fact that we are strong, we are fit, we are healthy. And for some of us, that might not be something that's easy for us. We might wonder why we suffer with things when other people don't. And Jesus felt that suffering. He knows what it's like to be at the weakest point. And the cross demanded his strength.
Matthew 27, verses 45 to 50. Subtitled The Death of Jesus. At noon, darkness fell across the whole land until 3 o'clock. At about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, "Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of the bystanders misunderstood and thought he was calling for the prophet Elijah. One of them ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, holding it up to him on a stick so he could drink. But the rest said, "Leave him alone. Let's see whether Elijah will come and save him." Then Jesus shouted out once again and gave up his spirit.
And the final thing the cross demands is his life. Nick read to us the final passage that we're going to look at here. And Jesus cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And he takes his last breath and he dies. When Jesus was on the cross, for a moment in history, the Father and the Son were separated. As Jesus breathed his last, he gave up his life. He did that so that love could enter in. In the part after this, we read that the curtain temple tore in two. And what that means is the place where God sits and the place where we sit, the curtain in the middle of that had been broken apart so that we can get back to God. Jesus gave up his life. The cross ultimately demanded his life from him. And he did that so that we may be set free. He did that because he loves us so much. He would go through all of the things I've talked about and more so that we can know love, we can have life. And I hope that this Good Friday, you take a minute to think about what Jesus has really done for you. You take a minute to thank him for the suffering he went through, for the demands of the cross that he put himself through to set you free. The point of this video is not so that you know the story in your head of how he died, but it's so that you realize in your hearts how deeply loved you are. The love that he has for you is unconditional. The cross demanded everything from Jesus, and all he wants from us is for us to say yes and to accept the love that he has for us. And it doesn't end here. It seems horrible and it's a sad story, but it doesn't end here, because what happens next we see on Sunday in the joyous celebration of Easter, where Charmaine is going to give us the good news of that glorious day.